Just in case nobody told you today, you are not behind. You aren't behind on healing, you aren't behind on having it figured out, and you are not behind on life's invisible timeline.
Oh, man. That is, it's just a message that feels like a massive collective exhale, doesn't it?
It really does. It completely disarms you right from the start. So, welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a really beautiful piece of source material that functions as this profound mental health reminder, but also serves as a highly practical guide to actually getting support when you decide you are ready.
Yeah, and our source today comes from Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC. And the central mission of this text is to basically completely dismantle the pressure we put on ourselves to, have our emotional lives perfectly scheduled.
Right, because we all do that. Let's start with the theoretical foundation of this, because the psychology of this barrier is just fascinating. When I read the phrase life's invisible timeline in our notes, it immediately brought to mind a very specific feeling.
I can imagine. What did you picture?
Well, imagine running on a track, but you are completely blindfolded. You have absolutely no idea where the finish line is, and you can't see a clock anywhere.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly stressful.
Exactly. But all around you, you constantly hear the footsteps of other runners passing you by, and you hear the crowd cheering for them. And you just end up completely exhausting yourself trying to keep pace in a race that you can't even see.
That is a painfully accurate visualization of modern anxiety. I mean, what is crucial to understand here is that this feeling is a direct byproduct of our human social evolution colliding violently with modern digital culture.
Right, because our brains aren't built for this, are they?
No, not at all. From an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain is literally hardwired to look around and compare our progress to the immediate tribe. That comparison mechanism kept us alive. It ensured we were, fitting in, contributing, and surviving.
But the scale of the tribe has completely warped now. We aren't just looking at a village of 50 people anymore. We are constantly exposed to the highly curated, meticulously edited highlight reels of millions of people.
Precisely. And that massive exposure creates the illusion of this universal standardized timeline. It tells you that you must reach specific career milestones by a certain age, or that your relationship should follow a strict trajectory.
And if you fall off that track, you're failing.
Exactly. And worst of all, it tells you that if you experience trauma or anxiety, you should be perfectly healed within a neat, socially acceptable window.
Which is so toxic. We know clinically that compound stress inhibits trauma recovery. But what's fascinating in the source here is how the invisible timeline essentially weaponizes our own recovery against us.
It really does.
We are using the desire to heal as the very stressor that prevents it from happening. We literally tell ourselves, I am failing at healing.
It is a massive psychological roadblock. When you internalize the belief that you are behind on your emotional recovery, you introduce a heavy secondary layer of stress right on top of your original trauma or depression.
Which your body just cannot handle.
Right. Think about the mechanics of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot heal a dysregulated nervous system by flooding it with more cortisol and more adrenaline.
It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing a ticking clock at it. You're just adding anxiety to the flames.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. Your brain shifts into a fight-or-flight state over the sheer fact that you aren't recovering fast enough. And a brain in fight or flight cannot process complex emotional trauma. It is entirely focused on immediate survival.
It's just trying to get through the next 5 minutes.
Exactly. Which brings us to a foundational line in the source material. It says, you're right where you are, and that's the only place healing can start.
Which introduces the psychological concept of radical acceptance. You kind of have to put the "you are here" sticker on the map before you can even begin to draw a line toward an exit.
Yes. And we need to be very clear about what radical acceptance actually means in practice, because people get this confused. It does not mean you approve of your anxiety, your grief, or your trauma.
Right. It doesn't mean you're giving up or throwing in the towel.
Exactly. It simply means you stop burning your vital cognitive energy fighting the undeniable reality that your pain currently exists. I mean, if you are lost in a maze, refusing to acknowledge which corner you are currently standing in doesn't help you escape. It just keeps you lost.
It is entirely about spatial reality. You accept that you are not behind, you are just here. But then the source material points to a pivotal moment of transition. It says, if something in you is saying maybe it's time, trust that voice.
The whisper of readiness. It is very rarely a loud cinematic epiphany. is usually just a quiet, persistent realization that your current baseline of living has become unsustainable.
And bridging the gap from hearing that voice to actually sitting in front of a professional is where the physical friction usually stops people cold.
Oh, absolutely. The logistics are a nightmare.
Right. Historically, listening to that voice meant you suddenly had to take on like a part-time job of logistics. You had research a clinic, navigate 45 minutes of traffic, sit in a sterile waiting room with outdated magazines.
The fluorescent lights.
Yes, the humming fluorescent lights. And just hope your nervous system didn't completely shut down before you even made it to the couch.
That geographic and logistical friction has always been one of the most significant barriers to entry in mental health care. And this is especially true for individuals dealing with severe depression or chronic anxiety.
Because their energy is already depleted.
Exactly. Executive function, which is the literal mental bandwidth required to plan, organize, and execute a series of tasks, is severely depleted. Just the act of getting to an appointment can require more energy than the patient actually possesses.
Which brings us to the structural model that coping and healing counseling uses to eliminate that exact friction. According to the text, this practice was founded by Elias Joseph, a licensed clinical social worker, and it operates entirely as a 100% telehealth practice.
That's a huge shift from the traditional model.
It really is. They deliver care via secure, IPA-compliant video across all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
Operating across all 159 counties represents a massive geographical footprint. It democratizes access in a way that traditional brick-and-mortar clinics simply cannot achieve, especially for rural populations.
But let me challenge this telehealth model for a second, because I know it raises questions for people who view the traditional therapist's office as a necessary sanctuary.
Sure, it's a fair concern.
We often talk about the home being a safe place to start therapy, but for a lot of people dealing with complex family dynamics, domestic trauma, or severe isolation, their living room is the exact environment they need to escape.
Right.
So does an exclusively telehealth model actually risk enabling isolation rather than treating it?
That is a highly critical nuance, and it forces us to look at how boundaries function in therapy. You are right, for some, the home is the locus of their stress. However, what clinical data over the last few years has overwhelmingly shown is that part of the therapeutic work in telehealth actually becomes learning to carve out and enforce a safe space within your own environment.
Oh, that's really interesting. So the boundary setting actually becomes part of the practice itself.
Exactly. The therapist works with the patient to establish that boundary, whether it means taking the session in a parked car, locking a bedroom door, or establishing firm do not disturb rules with family members.
You're actively practicing the skills you're learning.
Precisely. And what the psychological community has found is that the therapeutic alliance, that crucial bond of trust between practitioner and patient, can be built just as robustly over secure video.
That makes a lot of sense.
By removing the geographic friction, CHC allows the start of therapy to be dictated entirely by the patient's emotional readiness, not their ability to secure reliable transportation or commute across town.
So we are literalizing the concept of meeting you right where you are. But being physically comfortable, whether on your couch or in your parked car, is really only half the battle.
Oh, for sure. The environment is just step one.
Right. If you log on to a secure video session and the person on the other side of the screen has absolutely no context for your cultural background or your specific stage of life, your nervous system is going to spike right back into defense mode.
The practitioner matching process. It is arguably the single most critical variable in determining whether therapy will be successful. Access to a video link means very little if the clinical care isn't precisely tailored to the individual's psychological needs.
Finding the right therapist is a lot like tuning an instrument. If you are a cello and you are trying to play with a violin bow, you are going to make some noise, but you certainly aren't going to make music.
I love that analogy. The friction is completely wrong.
Exactly. Having different professional credentials available is entirely about finding the right resonance for the patient. And what stands out in our source material about CHC is the sheer scale of their ecosystem. They have a team of over 15 licensed therapists.
A team of that size is significant because it allows a practice to move beyond generalized care and offer a true ecosystem of highly specific specializations.
And the notes detail a real alphabet soup of credentials. We've got LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs. For anyone outside the mental health field, those letters can feel like a barrier themselves.
They can be very intimidating if you don't know what they mean.
But they actually represent fundamentally different frameworks for how a professional approaches healing, don't they?
They do. They represent distinct, highly valuable lenses. An LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, is uniquely trained to view the patient within their larger environmental and systemic context. They look at how community, resources, and societal structures impact mental health.
Okay, so a very broad, holistic view. What about an LPC?
An LPC, a licensed professional counselor, typically focuses heavily on individual psychological dynamics. They utilize cognitive and behavioral interventions to address internal thought patterns.
Got it. And the LMFT?
An LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist, is specifically trained in systems theory. They look at how the family unit, or the couple, interacts as a complete, interconnected system, rather than just a collection of isolated individuals.
Having all three frameworks functioning under one virtual roof means you have multiple toolkits readily available. You aren't forcing every emotional problem to look like a nail just because your clinic only happens to employ hammers.
That ecosystem approach ensures that whether a patient comes in for individual therapy, couples counseling, family therapy, or teen therapy, which they offer for ages 13 and up, by the way, they are met with the specific clinical framework designed for that dynamic.
And their clinical specialties really reflect that breadth. The text mentions they cover severe anxiety, clinical depression, complex trauma and PTSD, grief, relationship distress, and generalized stress.
It's a very comprehensive umbrella of care.
It is. But what we really need to drill down into is the source's explicit mention that this is a diverse, culturally competent team. We hear cultural competence used as a corporate buzzword quite a bit. But in the context of deep trauma work, what are the actual mechanics of it? How does a culturally competent team fundamentally alter a patient's experience?
It alters the experience by removing the burden of translation.
The burden of translation, wow.
Yeah. Cultural competence means the therapist possesses the deep awareness, education, and clinical skills to understand the complex intersectional realities of a patient's life. It means understanding how a patient's race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic background inextricably shapes their daily experience of the world.
So it moves far beyond basic empathy.
Precisely. Empathy is simply the therapist saying, I can see that you are in deep pain. Cultural competence is the therapist saying, I understand the specific systemic pressures, generational dynamics, and cultural factors that are compounding your pain, and those factors will be central to our treatment plan.
That is a massive distinction. Think about the friction of a mismatch session. If a patient has to spend the first 20 minutes of an expensive therapy hour desperately trying to explain the basic cultural context of their family dynamics to a well-meaning therapist who just doesn't understand the nuance.
The therapeutic alliance fractures before it even forms.
Exactly. The patient ends up doing the heavy cognitive lifting of educating their therapist rather than doing the vulnerable work of healing themselves.
So when CHC states they utilize a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 professionals, they are communicating a clinical capacity. They're saying, we have the structural ability to accurately contextualize your specific trauma.
Right, because a teenager dealing with academic burnout and digital pressure needs something totally different than an adult dealing with grief.
A 13-year-old requires a fundamentally different therapeutic resonance than a first-generation adult navigating the specific grief of losing a parent. It has to be tailored.
That tailored approach completely dismantles the underlying fear that you will be misunderstood when you finally reach out for help. But, even if we dispel the myth of the invisible timeline, and even if we remove the geographical friction through telehealth, and even if we guarantee a culturally competent therapist,
There's still one more hurdle.
yeah, we still have to confront the final imposing barrier that stops millions of people from seeking care.
Financial reality of healthcare.
There is an incredibly painful irony baked into the mental health landscape. Often, severe financial stress, like the sheer crushing weight of trying to survive and make ends meet, is the exact trauma or anxiety that is driving an individual to need therapy in the first place.
It creates a devastating systemic catch-22. The patient requires professional intervention to cope with the anxiety of financial survival, but accessing that intervention requires financial resources they do not possess.
The cost of getting help becomes a massive contributor to the burden that caused the need for help. But here is where the source material from Coping and Healing Counseling gets highly practical. They have structurally organized their practice to aggressively dismantle this financial wall. Most notably, they accept Medicaid with a $0 copay.
A $0 copay for Medicaid is a profound intervention at the systemic level. It provides highly specialized clinical care to populations that are historically and systematically priced out of the mental health market.
And it extends to major commercial insurances as well. They accept Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana, noting that copays typically range from just $10 to $40 per session.
That level of accessibility is honestly rare.
It is. And for anyone listening who is making a mental note right now, their contact is highly accessible. The phone number is 404-832-010. The website is cheechtherapy.com, and you can email them directly at support@cheechtherapy.com.
Those are great resources to have on hand.
Definitely. But I want to analyze the psychology of this financial structure for a second. We discussed earlier how the pressure of the invisible timeline actively prevents healing by keeping the nervous system dysregulated. How does radical financial accessibility actually accelerate the clinical healing process?
We can understand this by looking at the mechanics of cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort and bandwidth currently being utilized in a person's working memory. Think of it like the RAM on a computer.
Oh, I like that, the mental RAM.
Yeah, when someone is operating under severe financial anxiety, their cognitive load is almost entirely maxed out just running the background applications of basic survival.
Right. Think about the last time you tried to focus on a deeply complex, demanding task at work while simultaneously worrying about a major medical bill you had to pay. Your working memory is completely hijacked.
You literally don't have the processing power left.
Now imagine trying to untangle decades of complex childhood trauma with that same hijacked working memory.
It is nearly impossible. Deep therapeutic work requires intense cognitive and emotional bandwidth. The patient has to reflect, process difficult memories, and actively practice new emotional regulation techniques.
Which takes so much focus.
If a patient is sitting in a session, but the entire time their brain is running a panicked background calculation on how they're going to afford the $80 copay for that specific hour, they simply cannot fully engage in the therapeutic process.
They might be physically present on the video call, but psychologically their brain is just balancing a checkbook.
Exactly. By completely neutralizing that financial terror, particularly with a $0 Medicaid copay or a highly manageable commercial copay, CHC is essentially handing the patient their cognitive bandwidth back.
You're freeing up the RAM.
The cognitive load plummets. That vital mental energy is freed up and can be entirely redirected toward the deeply demanding work of emotional processing.
It clears the runway for actual progress. You cannot separate the emotional journey of healing from the brutal physical and financial realities of the patient's daily life.
And this ties everything right back to the practice's core philosophy, which is facilitating therapy strictly at the patient's own emotional pace. You cannot truly heal at your own pace if you feel a financial ticking clock forcing you to rush through your trauma before your bank account hits zero.
That is so true. It's just another version of the invisible timeline.
Precisely. True. Effective accessibility must exist on both the geographical and the financial plane simultaneously.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of why this model matters so much. Let's bring this entire deep dive full circle. We opened today with a quote that serves as both permission and a promise. Just in case nobody told you today, you are not behind.
In a culture completely obsessed with optimization, it is a truth that requires daily reiteration.
Because the world is absolutely going to keep trying to slip that blindfold back on you. The culture, the algorithms, and the social feeds are going to endlessly try to convince you that the invisible timeline is an absolute reality.
They'll tell you that you're falling behind.
They will tell you that everyone else is winning the race, and that you are fundamentally failing just by experiencing the messy, non-linear reality of being human.
But as we've explored today, the architecture of genuine healing does not require a race. It requires a stable foundation. And that foundation can only be built on the radical acceptance of your present moment.
Exactly. So to you, listening right now, there is no master schedule you are failing to meet. You are right where you are, and that specific location is precisely where the work begins. But you do not have to carry the weight of figuring it out alone.
Not at all.
Whenever your inner voice finally whispers, maybe it's time, the traditional friction of starting has been systematically removed. The team at Coping and Healing Counseling is literally structured to meet you exactly where you are across all 159 counties in Georgia via secure telehealth.
It's just a remarkably accessible system.
They are equipped with the diverse cultural competence needed to deeply understand your specific context. And they are organized financially, from $0 Medicaid copays to accessible commercial rates, to ensure that your cognitive energy goes entirely into your healing rather than into panic over a bill.
They have built a deeply thoughtful ecosystem. By leveraging technology to solve geography, maintaining an expansive diversity of clinical lenses, and addressing the financial reality of their patients, they have successfully dismantled the traditional gatekeepers of mental health support.
So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have spent this time exploring the heavy damage inflicted by life's invisible timeline. We've established that true, lasting healing can only commence when we radically accept the exact coordinates of our current emotional state.
Placing that "you are here" sticker firmly on your own map.
Exactly. So here's the question we want you to take with you into the rest of your day. If true healing fundamentally requires that level of radical acceptance, what is the very first expectation about your own personal timeline that you need to completely let go of today?
What a vital, grounding question to sit with.
Until next time, be kind to yourselves and remember, you are not behind.